He thought his daughter's simple act of offering a crayon was just a sweet moment. He never imagined the woman who accepted it was a lonely CEO whose life and his was about to change forever. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The city library was Liam's sanctuary, a quiet haven where the world outside, with its unpaid bills and looming deadlines, seemed to fade into the hushed rustle of turning pages. The air smelled of old paper and floor polish, a scent he'd come to associate with a fragile sense of peace. He sat at a large oak table in the children's section, a thick architecture textbook open in front of him, its pages filled with elegant lines and impossible structures that felt like they belonged to another life. His life, before the firm downsized, before his wife left, before everything became a careful calculation of what he could afford to lose next. Across from him, his 7-year-old daughter, Maya, was a whirlwind of quiet focus. Her brow was furrowed in concentration, her tongue peeking out from the corner of her mouth as she guided a bright blue crayon across a sheet of printer paper he'd snagged from the library's recycling bin. Her world was one of vibrant color and limitless imagination, and Liam's one remaining purpose was to protect it at all costs, to build a wall of calm around her even as his own foundations crumbled. He glanced down at his watch, a cheap digital one he'd bought after pawning his grandfather's timepiece. 2 more hours until they had to leave, 2 hours of free heat and light before returning to their small, drafty apartment. He ran a hand through his hair, the weariness settling deep in his bones. He was supposed to be designing buildings like the ones in this book, not just staring at them with a hollow ache in his chest. That's when he saw her. She was sitting alone at a table near the window, a sleek silver laptop open but untouched. She wore a simple gray turtleneck and dark trousers, clothing that was understated yet carried an undeniable air of quality. Her hair was pulled back into a neat, low bun, and her posture was perfect, almost unnervingly still. She looked like a sculpture carved from polished stone, beautiful but cold, and profoundly out of place in the cheerful chaos of the children's wing. She was staring out the window, her expression unreadable, but Liam saw the subtle tension in her jaw, the way her fingers rested on the keyboard without moving. It was the look of someone surrounded by noise, but consumed by a silence of their own. He didn't mean to stare, but there was something captivating about her stillness, a stark contrast to his own restless anxiety. Then, the moment shattered. Maya, having exhausted the potential of her blue crayon, slid off her chair with the silent grace of a tiny ninja. She clutched a waxy yellow crayon in her small fist and made a beeline for the woman's table. Liam's heart leaped into his throat. "Maya, no," he whispered, but it was too late. She was already there, standing beside the stranger's chair, holding up the crayon like an offering. The woman turned, startled, her mask of composure cracking for a split second to reveal a flicker of surprise, maybe even vulnerability. Maya didn't flinch. "You look sad," she said, her voice clear and honest in the quiet room. "Yellow is a happy color. You can borrow it if you want." Liam felt a hot flush of embarrassment creep up his neck. He stood, ready to swoop in with a torrent of apologies, to rescue this poor, unsuspecting woman from his daughter's unfiltered compassion. But before he could take a step, the woman's expression softened. The tension in her jaw eased, and a small, hesitant smile touched her lips. It wasn't a big smile, not a practiced one, but it was real, and it transformed her face entirely. She looked down at the crayon, then back at Maya, and for the first time, Liam saw not a statue, but a person. A person who looked like she hadn't been offered a simple, unconditional kindness in a very long time. She reached out and took the crayon, her long, elegant fingers closing around the small piece of wax. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice softer than he'd expected. "I think I needed that." The woman, whose name Liam would later learn was Catherine, held the crayon like it was something fragile and foreign. She didn't use it, just rolled it between her thumb and forefinger, the bright, waxy yellow, a stark splash of color against her pale skin. Liam finally found his voice, stepping forward with an apologetic half-smile. "I am so sorry," he said, his tone low. She has a tendency to adopt people. Catherine looked up at him, and the brief warmth he'd seen in her eyes was still there, flickering beneath a surface of practiced composure. "Don't apologize," she said. "It was the most honest thing anyone has said to me all day." Her voice was smooth, a low melody that seemed at odds with the crayon she was holding. Maya, satisfied that her mission was complete, beamed. "My name is Maya. What's yours?" Liam cringed internally, but the woman didn't seem to mind. "Catherine," she replied, her gaze shifting from Maya back to him. There was an unspoken question in her eyes, a curiosity that made him feel suddenly self-conscious of his worn flannel shirt and the frayed cuffs of his jeans. "Liam," he offered, gesturing vaguely toward his daughter. "And this is my little freelance philanthropist." Catherine's smile deepened, reaching her eyes this time. "Well, it's a pleasure to meet you both." The moment hung in the air, a strange quiet bubble in the middle of the bustling library. It was clear this was where the interaction should end. He should gather Maya, offer one more apology, and retreat to their table, but he didn't move. There was something about her, an aura of profound loneliness, that resonated with his own, albeit for entirely different reasons. He was lonely because his world had shrunk. She looked lonely because hers was too vast. "I should let you get back to your work," he said finally, the words feeling like a retreat. Catherine glanced down at her laptop, its screen glowing with what looked like complex charts and data streams. "It's fine," she said, closing the lid with a soft click. "I wasn't getting much done anyway." The admission was small, but it felt significant, like a crack in the polished facade. She was still holding the crayon. "She's very perceptive," Catherine added, her voice quieter now, almost to herself. Liam nodded, a swell of pride mixing with his anxiety. "Too perceptive sometimes. She sees things I wish she didn't have to." He hadn't meant to say that, to let a piece of his own struggle slip out, but the words came unbidden. Catherine's gaze sharpened, not with pity, but with a kind of focused understanding that was far more disarming. She didn't offer platitudes or empty reassurances. She just held his gaze, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. It was a fleeting connection, a brief intersection of two orbits that had no business crossing, but it left an impression. As he led Maya back to their table, he couldn't shake the feeling of that shared glance. He risked a look over his shoulder. Catherine was watching them, a faint, unreadable smile on her face. Then she looked down, and, with slow, deliberate strokes, began to draw a small, simple sun on a blank sheet of paper next to her laptop. For the rest of the afternoon, Liam tried to focus on the book in front of him, but his mind kept drifting back to the woman at the window. He could feel her presence across the room, a quiet hum of energy that was both calming and unsettling. He was acutely aware of every time she shifted in her chair, every soft sip she took from a sleek water bottle, every moment her gaze lifted from her work. He told himself it was just curiosity. People like her didn't frequent the children's section of the public library on a Tuesday afternoon. They belonged in high-rise offices with panoramic views, in sterile boardrooms where decisions were made in hushed, confident tones. He knew that world, or at least he had once grazed its edges. He remembered the feeling of a well-tailored suit, the weight of a project budget, the intoxicating thrill of seeing a design move from paper to steel and glass. Now, that life felt like a photograph of a stranger. His world was this: the smell of aging books, the faint stickiness of the table from a forgotten juice box, and the fierce, protective love for the little girl who was currently trying to build a tower out of erasers. Maya was getting restless. She'd finished her drawing a vibrant, chaotic masterpiece of a castle guarded by a three-headed dog and was now fidgeting in her seat. "Daddy, I'm hungry," she whispered, tugging on his sleeve. Liam glanced at his watch. Still an hour before they had planned to leave, he checked his wallet, the worn leather soft and thin in his hands. He counted the contents in his head. $12.42. Enough for their bus fare home and maybe a small snack from the vending machine in the lobby. "Okay, kiddo," he said, forcing a cheerfulness he didn't feel. "How about some peanut butter crackers?" He saw the flicker of disappointment in her eyes, but she masked it with a quick nod. She never complained. That, more than anything, was what broke his heart on a daily basis. As they packed up their meager supplies, stuffing crayons and paper into Maya's small backpack, he chanced another glance toward Catherine's table. She was gone. Her laptop, her water bottle, the elegant coat that had been draped over her chair all vanished. The only thing left behind was the single sheet of paper with the small yellow sun drawn in the corner. He felt a strange pang of disappointment, a feeling he had no right to. Why would she stay? She was a transient figure, a brief, intriguing anomaly in his otherwise predictable day. As he zipped up Maya's bag, he noticed a small, folded note tucked under the leg of their table. His name, Liam, was written on the front in elegant, looping script. His breath caught. He picked it up, his fingers suddenly clumsy. Inside, the note was short and simple. "Thank you for the sun, my treat." Tucked inside was a crisp $20 bill. Liam stared at it, the paper feeling both foreign and heavy in his hand. It wasn't a gesture of pity, the note was too personal for that. It was a gesture of, what? Connection? Gratitude? He didn't know. But it sent a complicated wave of pride, shame, and an emotion he couldn't name through him. He looked around the library, but she was nowhere to be seen. She had slipped away as quietly as she had arrived, leaving behind a small mystery and an act of kindness that felt both deeply generous and incredibly complicated. Liam stood there for a long moment, the $20 bill clutched in his hand. His first instinct was to be offended. He wasn't a charity case. He didn't need a handout from a stranger, no matter how well-intentioned. He had his pride, and lately, that was one of the few things he had left in abundance. He should have looked for her, found her, and given the money back with a polite but firm refusal. But then, he looked down at Maya, who was watching him with wide, curious eyes, completely unaware of the silent storm of emotions raging inside him. Her small hand slipped into his, her fingers warm and trusting. The thought of her face lighting up at the prospect of a hot chocolate and a real sandwich from the deli down the street, instead of stale crackers from a vending machine, chipped away at his pride. The $20 wasn't for him, it was for her. It was a brief reprieve, a small island of ease in their sea of constant struggle. Swallowing the hard knot of his pride, he folded the bill and tucked it into his pocket. "Change of plans, kiddo," he said, his voice a little rough. "How about we go get that hot chocolate you're always talking about?" Maya's gasp was audible. Her eyes lit up like the city skyline at dusk, full of pure, unadulterated joy. "Really? With the whipped cream and the sprinkles?" He managed a genuine smile. "The works." As they walked out of the library and into the crisp afternoon air, Maya skipped ahead, chattering excitedly about marshmallows and chocolate drizzles. Liam walked slower, his thoughts still tangled. He couldn't shake the image of Catherine. Who was she? Why had she done it? The gesture felt too personal to be random. There was a deliberate kindness to it, an understanding that went beyond mere sympathy. She hadn't just left money. She'd left a thank you note, acknowledging Maya's gift first. She had framed her act of giving as an act of reciprocity. It was elegant, thoughtful, and deeply unsettling. He found himself scanning the street, a foolish, unconscious hope that he might see her, that he might get a chance to say, "What? Thank you?" To ask her why? He didn't know. He only knew that for the first time in a long time, someone had seen past the worn-out facade to the man underneath, and instead of looking away, they had offered a quiet, unassuming light. It was a fleeting encounter, a story with no next chapter. But as he watched his daughter press her nose against the deli window, her face a perfect portrait of happiness, he felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in months. Not hope, not yet, but something close, a possibility. The deli was warm and smelled of roasted coffee and baking bread, a stark contrast to the chilly air outside. Liam watched as Maya painstakingly chose a brownie from the display case, her small face a mask of intense concentration. He ordered her a hot chocolate and a small turkey sandwich for himself. The simple act of paying with the crisp $20 bill, feeling both like a betrayal of his self-reliance and a surrender to his daughter's happiness. They found a small table by the window, and for the next half hour the world felt blessedly simple. Maya recounted the plot of the book she was reading, her voice animated as she described brave knights and mischievous dragons. Liam listened, really listened, the usual hum of anxiety in his mind quieting for a moment. He wasn't thinking about the rent or the freelance project he was hoping to land. He was just here, in this moment, with her. As Maya licked the last of the whipped cream from her spoon, she looked at him with serious eyes. "The library lady was nice, Daddy." Liam nodded, stirring his coffee. "Yeah, she was. She looked like a queen from a storybook," Maya continued thoughtfully. "But a sad one, like she lost her crown." Liam almost choked on his coffee. His daughter's observations were sometimes so sharp they felt like tiny, expertly thrown darts. A sad queen. It was a surprisingly accurate description. There was a regal quality to Catherine's stillness, a sense of authority that her simple clothes couldn't hide. But Maya was right. There was a deep-seated sadness there, too, a loneliness that clung to her like a shadow. "Maybe she'll come back to the library," Maya said, her voice full of hope. "Maybe you could be her friend." Liam managed a weak smile. "I don't think so, sweetie. I think she was just passing through." But even as he said the words, a part of him rebelled against them. He found himself hoping Maya was right. He replayed their brief conversation, her soft voice, the way her smile transformed her face. He remembered the feel of the crayon in her hand, a small, insignificant object that had somehow bridged the chasm between their two worlds, if only for a moment. The thought was foolish, he knew. Their lives were on different tracks, heading in opposite directions. But as they left the deli and walked toward the bus stop, the city lights beginning to twinkle in the twilight, Liam couldn't shake the feeling that a single thread had been cast across that chasm. It was fragile, almost invisible, but it was there. And he found himself wondering, with a strange mix of fear and curiosity, what would happen if he or she ever decided to pull on it. 2 days later, Liam was back at the library, but this time the sense of sanctuary was gone. It had been replaced by a low-grade, humming anticipation. He told himself he was there for the free Wi-Fi, that he needed to send off another batch of applications for freelance design work. He told himself he was just there for research, to lose himself in the clean, logical lines of modern architecture. But he was lying. He was looking for her. Every time the library doors opened, his head would lift almost involuntarily. He scanned the faces of the people who entered, students with backpacks, mothers with toddlers, elderly men with newspaper sand. Each time, a small, irrational wave of disappointment washed over him when none of them were Catherine. He felt ridiculous. He was a grown man, a father, acting like a teenager with a crush. He didn't even know her. She was a ghost, a beautiful, enigmatic stranger who had drifted into his life and out again, leaving nothing but a $20 bill and a swirl of unanswered questions. Maya, oblivious to her father's internal turmoil, was happily engrossed in a pop-up book about the solar system. "Daddy, did you know Jupiter has more than 70 moons?" she asked, her eyes wide with wonder. "That's a lot of moons," Liam said, his voice distracted. He forced himself to focus on his laptop screen, on the sterile interface of the job application portal. He typed his name, his credentials, his experience. He attached his portfolio, a collection of designs that felt like they belonged to a more confident, more successful version of himself. As he hit send on the third application of the day, a familiar voice cut through the quiet hum of the library. "Jupiter is my favorite. All that chaotic beauty." Liam's head snapped up. Catherine was standing there, right beside their table. This time she wore a dark blue coat, the collar turned up against the chill. Her hair was down, falling in soft, dark waves around her shoulders. She looked less like a statue and more like a person today, but the same quiet intensity radiated from her. Maya gasped, a delighted little squeak. "You came back," Catherine smiled, a genuine warm smile that made Liam's breath catch. "I did. I was hoping I might run into you two." She held up a small, beautifully illustrated book. I saw this and thought of you, Maya. It's about a girl who paints stars." She handed the book to Maya, who took it with reverent hands, her eyes shining. Liam stood up, his heart pounding a nervous, unsteady rhythm against his ribs. He felt a ridiculous urge to smooth down his hair, to check if his shirt was wrinkled. "You didn't have to do that," he said, the words coming out more like a reflex than a conscious thought. Catherine's gaze met his, and he saw a flicker of something he couldn't quite decipher, amusement perhaps, or something deeper. "I know," she said softly. "But I wanted to." The air between them crackled with unspoken things. This was no longer a chance encounter. This was intentional. She had come back for them. And Liam, for all his pride and all his caution, felt a dangerous, thrilling spark of hope ignite in the quietest corners of his heart. Catherine didn't linger for long, but the brief exchange left a permanent mark on the afternoon. She had a way of making a simple conversation feel significant, as if every word was chosen with care. She asked Maya about her drawing, listening with rapt attention as Maya explained the complex political system of her crayon castle. Liam found himself watching Catherine, fascinated by the way she interacted with his daughter. She didn't talk down to her or use the saccharine sweet voice many adults adopted for children. She spoke to Maya as an equal, with genuine curiosity and respect. It was in those small moments that Liam saw past the elegant coat and the quiet poise. He saw a woman who was, perhaps, just as starved for a real connection as he was. "You have a good father, Maya," Catherine said, her eyes flicking to Liam for a brief moment. "He looks at you like you're the most important thing in the world." Liam felt his cheeks grow warm. "She is," he said, his voice quiet but firm. Catherine nodded slowly, a thoughtful expression on her face. "That's a rare thing." Before the silence could become awkward, she gathered her things. "I have to go," she said, a hint of regret in her tone. "But it was good to see you both again." As she turned to leave, Liam found himself speaking before he could think. "Wait." She paused, turning back to him, her eyebrows raised in a silent question. He fumbled in his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a quick sketch he'd done the day before, a design for a small, sustainable community library, a dream project he'd been toying with for years. I wanted to thank you," he stammered, feeling foolish, "for the other day. And the book. This is what I do, or what I used to do." He handed her the sketch. It was just a doodle on a napkin. Nothing polished or professional, but it was a piece of him, a piece of the man he was before the world had worn him down. Catherine took the napkin, her fingers brushing his for a fraction of a second. The touch was light, almost imperceptible, but it sent a jolt of electricity through him. She unfolded the napkin and studied the sketch, her expression unreadable. She traced the lines of the roof with her fingertip, her gaze focused and intense. "It's beautiful," she said finally, her voice soft with what sounded like genuine admiration. "You have a real gift, Liam," he shrugged, trying to downplay the swell of pride in his chest. "It's just an idea." "Ideas are the most powerful things in the world," she said, carefully folding the napkin and tucking it into her coat pocket. "Thank you for sharing this with me." And then she was gone, leaving Liam standing there with a racing heart and the distinct feeling that something significant had just happened. He hadn't just given her a sketch, he'd given her a glimpse into his soul. And she hadn't just accepted it, she had honored it. The thread between them, once fragile and thin, now felt a little stronger, a little more real. A week passed, and the library became their unofficial meeting spot. It was never planned, never spoken of, but twice more that week, Catherine appeared, always with a quiet smile and a book or a small puzzle for Maya. Their conversations were brief, islands of calm in the sea of their separate lives, but they were charged with a growing sense of intimacy. Liam learned small things about her: that she preferred tea to coffee, that she loved the smell of old books, that she found the predictable rhythm of the city traffic somehow soothing. She learned things about him, too, that he dreamed of designing affordable, beautiful housing, that his favorite thing to cook was a slightly burnt grilled cheese, and that he worried constantly about Maya growing up without the things other kids had. He never asked what she did for a living, and she never offered. There was a silent agreement between them to exist only in this space, in these moments, unburdened by the weight of their lives outside the library walls. He knew she was wealthy. It was obvious in the quality of her clothes, the quiet confidence she exuded, the way she never seemed to be in a hurry. But he didn't care. In fact, a part of him preferred not knowing. The mystery allowed him to see her, not her status. One rainy Friday afternoon, the library was unusually crowded. Liam and Maya had managed to snag a small table in a quiet corner. Liam was sketching again, losing himself in the clean lines of a new design, while Maya was meticulously coloring a picture of a rainbow. Catherine arrived, looking flustered for the first time since he'd met her. Her hair was damp from the rain, and there was a smudge of ink on her cheek. "Is this seat taken?" she asked, gesturing to the empty chair at their table. "It is now," Liam said, a smile spreading across his face. She sank into the chair with a sigh, placing a sleek leather portfolio on the table. "Long day?" he asked. She nodded, rubbing her temples. "You could say that. Sometimes it feels like I spend my entire day in meetings, talking about things that don't matter with people who don't listen." The complaint was so normal, so relatable, that it made her feel instantly more accessible. "I know the feeling," Liam said, thinking of his last soul-crushing interview for a junior drafting position. Maya looked up from her coloring, her brow furrowed. "Why do grown-ups have so many meetings?" she asked. Catherine laughed, a genuine, tired laugh. "That's a very good question, Maya. I think it's because we forget how to just be quiet and draw rainbows." She reached out and tapped the vibrant drawing. "This is much more important than anything I did today." At that moment, another woman approached their table. She was impeccably dressed in a sharp business suit, her expression a mask of polite urgency. "Catherine," she said, her voice low but firm, "we have a call with the Tokyo board in 10 minutes. They're waiting." Catherine's face shuddered. The brief, soft vulnerability vanished, replaced by a cool, professional mask. The Queen had found her crown again. "I know, Sarah. I'll be right there." She stood up, her movements suddenly crisp and efficient. She gave Liam and Maya a fleeting, apologetic smile. "I'm sorry. I have to go." Liam just nodded, a strange emptiness settling in his stomach. The bubble had burst. The real world, her real world, had intruded. As Catherine walked away, following the woman in the suit, Liam saw the name on the portfolio she'd left behind. Sterling Development. A name he knew. A name everyone in the city knew. They were one of the largest, most powerful real estate development firms in the country, known for their billion-dollar high-rises and ruthless business tactics. And Catherine? She wasn't just an employee. The way the other woman deferred to her, the authority in her voice, it was all clear now. He felt a cold dread seep into his bones. The sad Queen wasn't just wealthy. She was royalty. The realization hit Liam like a physical blow. Sterling Development. Catherine Sterling. The name echoed in his head, rearranging everything he thought he knew about her. He had seen her name in the business section of the newspaper, on billboards advertising luxury condos he could never afford to walk into, let alone live in. She wasn't just a woman with a good job. She was a titan of industry, a figure of immense power and influence. The quiet, gentle woman who admired his sketches and laughed at his daughter's jokes was the same woman whose company was famous for projects that often displaced communities, a company that represented everything he, with his dreams of sustainable, human-centric architecture, stood against. He felt a wave of nausea. Had this all been a game to her? A little social experiment? Was he her pet project, the struggling artist she could patronize to feel better about her cutthroat corporate life? The thought was ugly, but it took root in the fertile ground of his insecurity. He looked at the book she had given Maya, at the memory of the $20 bill, at the napkin sketch she had tucked so carefully into her pocket. Every act of kindness now seemed tainted, colored by the vast, unbridgeable chasm of her wealth and power. He felt like a fool. He had let himself be vulnerable, had shared a piece of his dream with her, and all the while, she was a world away, looking down from a height he couldn't even comprehend. He quickly packed their things, his movements jerky and abrupt. "Come on, Maya, we're leaving," he said, his voice harsher than he intended. Maya looked up, her expression confused and a little hurt. "But why? We didn't finish." "We're done," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. He avoided looking in the direction Catherine had gone. He didn't want to see her again. He didn't want to face the confirmation of what he now suspected, that he was nothing more than a momentary diversion in the life of a billionaire. As they rushed out of the library, the warm, comforting scent of old books now felt suffocating. The sanctuary had become a cage, and he had been the one on display. The rain was still falling, a cold, steady drizzle that matched the sudden chill in his heart. He pulled Maya's hood up, shielding her from the weather, his mind racing. He had to end this. He couldn't let Maya get any more attached to a woman who lived in a different universe, a woman for whom they were likely just a quaint, passing anecdote. He had to protect his daughter, and he had to protect what was left of his own fragile pride. The thread between them hadn't just been pulled, it had been revealed to be a steel cable, and he was dangling from it, utterly powerless. He wouldn't allow it. He wouldn't be her charity case. Liam spent the next 2 days in a state of agitated misery. He avoided the library, telling Maya they needed a break to explore other parts of the city, a lie that felt thin and brittle on his tongue. He tried to throw himself into his job search, but his focus was shot. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Catherine's face, not as the powerful CEO, but as the sad, quiet woman who had smiled at his daughter's offer of a crayon. The two images warred in his mind, leaving him feeling confused and angry. On the 3rd day, a package arrived at their apartment. It was a long, cylindrical tube, the kind used for architectural blueprints, addressed to him in the same elegant script he now recognized. There was no return address, but he knew who it was from. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it. Inside, rolled up and tied with a simple silk ribbon, was not a blueprint, but a professional, high-quality print of his napkin sketch. It had been beautifully rendered, the lines clean and sharp, the colors vibrant. It looked like a page torn from a high-end architectural magazine. Tucked inside the roll was a note. "Liam, I know you saw the name on my portfolio. I know what you must be thinking. Please, let me explain. I wasn't being dishonest, I was just trying to be myself for a little while, without the name attached. That person you met in the library. The one who loves Jupiter and burnt grilled cheese, that's the real me. The CEO is just a job. Please, meet me. Our usual spot, 3 p.m. tomorrow. Catherine." The note was a plea, a bridge offered across the chasm he had been so determined to widen. Part of him wanted to throw it away, to ignore it, to cling to the righteous anger that was so much safer than the alternative. But the print of his sketch, that was a different kind of message. She hadn't just acknowledged his dream, she had elevated it, shown him what it could look like, what he could look like. It was an act of profound respect, not pity. It was a gesture that said, "I see you. I see your talent." He sat on the floor of his small living room, the print spread out before him, the scent of fresh ink filling the air. He looked at the clean lines, the thoughtful design, the dream he had almost let die. And then he looked at the note again. The real me. He didn't know if he could believe her. He didn't know if he could trust her, or himself. But he knew he had to go. He had to know which version of Catherine was the truth, the powerful, untouchable CEO, or the sad queen who had been captivated by a child's simple offering of a yellow crayon. The next day, Liam walked into the library feeling like he was walking into an arena. The familiar space felt charged with tension, every quiet rustle of paper sounding like a judgment. He found Catherine at their usual table, a cup of tea steaming in front of her. She looked up as he approached, her eyes full of a nervous, hopeful vulnerability he'd never seen before. He sat down, placing the rolled-up print on the table between them. He didn't say anything at first, just let the silence stretch. A quiet battle of wills. "Thank you for coming," she said finally, her voice barely a whisper. Liam's jaw was tight. "I almost didn't. I know," she said, her gaze dropping to her hands. "I understand why you're angry." "Angry doesn't cover it," he said, his voice low and steady. "I feel like an idiot, Catherine. Like I was some kind of project for you. My week befriending the working class. Is that what you're going to tell your friends at the country club?" The words were harsher than he'd intended, but they came from a place of deep, wounded pride. Catherine flinched as if he'd struck her. "No," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "It was never like that, Liam. You have to believe me." "Why should I?" he challenged. "Everything about you is a world away from me, from my daughter." "That name on your portfolio. Sterling Development buys and sells entire city blocks. You don't just have a different life. You live on a different planet." She looked at him then, her eyes pleading. "That planet is the loneliest place in the universe. I hate that world, Liam. I hate the meetings, the politics, the endless, empty pursuit of more. It's a gilded cage, and I've been trapped in it my whole life." Her voice cracked. "When I met you and Maya, it was the first time in years I felt like I was breathing real air. You didn't want anything from me. Maya just saw me. A sad person who needed a happy color. Do you have any idea what that felt like?" He didn't respond, his anger beginning to war with a reluctant empathy. "I didn't tell you who I was, because I knew the moment I did, I would stop being Catherine and start being Sterling Development," she continued, her voice gaining a desperate strength. "I would become a headline, a balance sheet, and I couldn't bear to lose the one real thing I'd found." She reached across the table, her hand hovering just above his. "This," she said, gesturing to the print, "this is not pity. This is respect. I see your talent, Liam. I see your heart. And it has nothing to do with money or status. Please, don't let my world poison the one thing that has started to make sense to me." The raw, unvarnished truth of her words hung in the air between them. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not the powerful CEO, but the sad Queen Maya had described, a woman desperate to lay down her heavy crown, if only for a little while. His anger began to recede, replaced by a deep, aching understanding. They were both trapped, just in different kinds of cages. Liam let out a long, slow breath, the tension in his shoulders beginning to ease for the first time in days. He looked from her pleading eyes to the beautifully rendered print of his dream. She hadn't just seen his talent, she had seen the best version of him, the version he had forgotten existed. The anger was gone, but the fear remained. "Even if I believe you," he said, his voice softer now, "it doesn't change anything. We're still from two different worlds, Catherine. It's a nice thought, a sweet story, but it's not real life." "What if it could be?" she whispered, a fragile hope in her voice. "What if we could make it real?" He shook his head, a sad, bitter smile touching his lips. "People like me don't get fairy tale endings." Catherine's expression hardened, a flash of the steel he'd imagined she possessed finally surfacing. "Don't you dare put yourself in a box, Liam. And don't you dare put me in one. I'm not a fairy tale princess, and you are not a project. We are two people who found each other in a library. That's it. Everything else is just noise." She leaned forward, her gaze intense. "I am tired of living a life that is safe and empty. I want something that's complicated and real. I want this, with you, with Maya." The conviction in her voice was absolute. She wasn't asking for his permission, she was stating a fact, a truth she had finally claimed for herself. It was bold, terrifying, and utterly captivating. Liam looked at her, at the fire in her eyes, and felt the last of his defensive walls crumble. Maybe he had it all wrong. Maybe the real risk wasn't in letting her in. Maybe the real risk was in letting her go. He slowly unrolled the print on the table, smoothing it out with his hands. He looked at his design, at the quiet, hopeful future it represented. Then he looked at her. "Okay," he said, the single word feeling like a monumental leap of faith. "Where do we start?" Catherine's answering smile was like the sun breaking through the clouds, brilliant and full of breathtaking warmth. "We start," she said softly, "with a burnt grilled cheese, your treat." The days that followed were a delicate, tentative dance. They met for coffee, for walks in the park, for more afternoons at the library. They were slowly, carefully, trying to build a bridge between their two worlds. Catherine was true to her word. She never tried to fix his life with money. She never offered to pay his rent or buy him a new car. Instead, she offered something far more valuable: her time, her attention, her belief in him. She would listen for hours as he talked about his designs, her questions sharp and insightful. She saw the genius in his ideas, the passion he had tried so hard to suppress. With her encouragement, he started working on his portfolio again, not with the desperation of a man looking for a job, but with the passion of an artist rediscovering his voice. He, in turn, began to see the real Catherine. He saw the woman who would get down on the floor to build elaborate Lego castles with Maya, the woman who had a surprisingly goofy laugh, the woman who was terrified of spiders but fascinated by thunderstorms. He learned about her lonely childhood, about the immense pressure she had been under since she was a teenager, about her own dreams of starting a foundation to support arts and community spaces. One Saturday, she invited them to her apartment. Liam had been dreading it, picturing a sterile, opulent penthouse that would only serve to highlight the chasm between them. But while her apartment was indeed in a sleek high-rise with breathtaking views, it was surprisingly empty. The furniture was elegant but sparse. The walls were bare, save for one single framed piece of art hanging in the entryway, his napkin sketch of the community library. He stood staring at it, his throat tight. "I told you," she said, coming to stand beside him. "Ideas are the most powerful things in the world. This one reminded me of what I was supposed to be doing." Later, as Maya happily explored the vast living room, Catherine led him to her home office. It was a minimalist space, dominated by a large desk and a wall of screens displaying stock tickers and market analyses. In the corner, however, was a small, simple easel. On it was a canvas, half-finished, a swirl of bright, abstract colors. "I used to paint," she said, a hint of shyness in her voice. "Before I took over the company, I haven't touched a brush in years." Liam walked over to the canvas, studying the bold strokes, the vibrant energy. "It's good," he said. "It's you." He turned to her. "Why did you stop?" She looked away, her gaze drifting toward the city skyline. "Because I was told it wasn't a serious pursuit. Because I started to believe that my value was tied to the company's stock price, not to this." She gestured to the painting. He stepped closer, taking her hand. Her fingers were cold. "The woman who sees the beauty in a child's crayon drawing, who frames a napkin sketch, who paints like this, that's the real you, Catherine. The CEO is the one who's not serious." She looked at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. He was giving her back the piece of herself she thought she had lost forever. In that moment, in that quiet, empty apartment high above the city, he wasn't the struggling artist, and she wasn't the powerful CEO. They were just Liam and Catherine, two people finding their way back to themselves, together. The bubble they had built, however, was fragile. The world outside the library and the quiet corners of the park was loud and intrusive. One afternoon, as Liam and Catherine were leaving a small, independent bookstore, a camera flash went off. A man with a press badge stepped forward, his expression predatory. "Ms. Sterling, a comment on the rumors you're stepping back from the Bridgeport Tower project?" Catherine froze, her body instantly tensing. Liam instinctively stepped in front of her, shielding her from the reporter. "She has no comment," he said, his voice firm. The reporter's eyes flicked to Liam, a smirk playing on his lips. "And who are you? Her new pro bono bodyguard?" Before Liam could retort, Catherine took his hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "He's with me," she said, her voice a low, cold command. She pulled Liam away, hailing a cab with an authority that was both breathtaking and intimidating. Inside the cab, the silence was heavy. The brief, ugly encounter had shattered their peaceful afternoon. The noise, as Catherine called it, had found them. "I'm sorry," she said, staring out the window, her reflection a pale, unhappy ghost. "This is what I was afraid of." "It's not your fault," Liam said, though his own heart was pounding. He had felt a surge of helpless rage at the reporter's sneering tone. "It's my name," she said, a bitter edge to her voice. "It's a target. And now, you're standing next to it." The incident was a harsh reminder of the reality they were trying to ignore. Their relationship couldn't exist in a vacuum. Her world was one of headlines, rumors, and relentless public scrutiny, and he, by simple association, was now part of that narrative. That evening, after he put Maya to bed, he saw the first article online. Billionaire CEO Catherine Sterling steps out with mystery man. The photo was grainy, but it was them. Him, looking angry and protective. Her, looking tense and unhappy. The comments section was a cesspool of speculation. Was he a gold digger? A secret lover? Was she having a breakdown? Liam felt sick. They were turning their quiet, tentative connection into a sordid, public spectacle. He thought about Maya. What would happen when her classmates saw this? What would they say? The fear he'd felt when he first learned Catherine's identity came rushing back, stronger than ever. He was a father first. His primary duty was to protect his daughter from this kind of ugliness. He loved Catherine. He was starting to realize just how much. But was that love worth exposing Maya to the corrosive glare of the public eye? He didn't know. He just knew that the bridge they had been so carefully building suddenly seemed impossibly long, crossing a chasm that was deeper and more treacherous than he had ever imagined. The media attention didn't fade, it intensified. Paparazzi started lurking near Liam's apartment building, their long lenses like vultures waiting for a scrap of drama. A tabloid ran a story with the headline, "From Penthouse to Pauper. Is Sterling's new love a charity case?" complete with a picture of his rundown apartment building next to one of her gleaming corporate headquarters. The shame was a physical weight, a constant pressure in his chest. He became fiercely protective of Maya, taking her to the park late at night, avoiding their usual haunts, trying to shield her from the whispers and the stares. But children are perceptive. Maya knew something was wrong. "Why are those men with cameras always outside, Daddy?" she asked one evening, her small face clouded with worry. "Are we in trouble?" Liam's heart broke. "No, sweetie," he said, pulling her into a tight hug. "They're just confused." He and Catherine tried to see each other, but it was fraught with difficulty. They met in quiet, out-of-the-way places, always feeling like they were looking over their shoulders. The easy, natural joy they had found was being suffocated by the constant stress and scrutiny. The difference in their worlds was no longer an abstract concept, it was a blaring, unavoidable reality. One evening, Catherine came to his apartment, slipping in through a back entrance to avoid the photographers. She looked exhausted, the strain of the past few weeks etched onto her face. "I can't do this to you, Liam," she said, her voice full of anguish. "I can't drag you and Maya through this mud. It's not fair." "This isn't your fault," he insisted, but his words felt hollow, even to him. "Isn't it?" she countered, her eyes welling with tears. "My name, my life, it's a storm. And I've pulled you right into the middle of it." They stood in the middle of his small, cluttered living room, the sounds of the city a distant hum. The chasm between them felt wider than ever. He loved her, but he loved his daughter more. And he was beginning to see that those two loves might be incompatible. Maybe we need to take a step back," he said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "Just until this dies down." Catherine stared at him, her expression crumbling. He saw the plea in her eyes, the silent request for him to fight, to say it didn't matter, but he couldn't. Fear, deep and paternal, had taken root. "A step back?" she whispered. "Or an ending?" He didn't have an answer. He couldn't bring himself to say the word, but the silence that followed was a confession in itself. She nodded slowly, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. She didn't argue. She didn't fight. She just accepted it, her shoulders slumping in a quiet, heartbreaking defeat. "I understand," she said softly. "You have to protect her." She turned and walked to the door, her movement slow and heavy. Liam didn't stop her. He just stood there, listening to her footsteps fade down the hallway, the sound of his own heart breaking, echoing in the sudden, deafening silence. The silence Catherine left behind was a palpable entity. It filled the corners of the apartment, clung to the air, and made every room feel colder, emptier. Liam tried to fill it with noise. He played music, left the television on, engaged Maya in constant, cheerful chatter. But it was a futile effort. The quiet was in his chest, a hollow ache that wouldn't go away. Maya felt it too. She stopped asking about Catherine, but her name hung in the air between them, an unspoken question. One afternoon, Liam found her sitting on her bed, staring at the book Catherine had given her, the one about the girl who painted stars. She was tracing the cover with her small finger, her expression lost and sad. "Do you miss her?" Liam asked softly, sitting on the edge of the bed. Maya nodded, her lower lip trembling. "She made you laugh, Daddy." The simple, honest observation was a punch to the gut. He had been so focused on protecting Maya from the storm of Catherine's world that he hadn't realized he was also shielding her from the light. He had been trying to keep the sadness out, but in doing so, he had locked the joy out as well. Meanwhile, Catherine had retreated completely. The articles about her and Liam disappeared, replaced by official-sounding press releases from Sterling Development about new projects and market expansions. To the world, it looked like business as usual. The mystery man had been a brief, forgettable detour. But Liam knew better. He saw her on a news segment one night, standing at a podium at a charity gala. She looked stunning in a dark, elegant gown, but her smile was brittle, her eyes hollow. She was the queen back on her throne, but the crown looked heavier than ever. He realized then the true depth of his mistake. He had let the world define them, had let the noise drown out the quiet, beautiful truth of what they had found. He had been so afraid of her world that he had pushed away the one person who had made his own world feel bigger, brighter, more hopeful. He had chosen safety over love, and the result was a life that felt safe, yes, but also profoundly, achingly incomplete. The turning point came in the form of a single, forgotten crayon. Liam was cleaning out Maya's backpack one evening when he found it tucked into a side pocket, a small, worn-down nub of waxy yellow. The happy color, the one that had started it all. He held it in his palm, the weight of it feeling impossibly heavy. It was a symbol of everything he had gained and everything he had let go. At that moment, he knew he couldn't live in the quiet anymore. He couldn't let fear write the end of their story. The next morning, he made a decision. He took the day off from his job search. He packed a small bag for Maya, and together they took a bus to the one place he knew he might find a piece of the real Catherine. They went to the city's contemporary art museum. It was a long shot, a wild guess based on a half-finished painting in an empty apartment, but it was all he had. They wandered through the bright, airy galleries for hours. Liam pointed out the different styles to Maya, explaining the use of color and texture, his old passion for art and design reawakening. Finally, in a quiet wing dedicated to local artists, he saw it. A single painting, larger than the others, a vibrant, chaotic explosion of color. It was unsigned, but he knew the style instantly. The title on the placard read, "Untitled, The Sun and the Storm." He stared at it, his heart pounding. It was her soul on a canvas, the chaos, the beauty, the sadness, the hope. Standing in front of that painting, he understood. He hadn't been a detour in her life, he had been a catalyst. He had reminded her of the part of herself she had forgotten, just as she had reminded him of his own forgotten dreams. As he stood there, lost in thought, a museum guard approached him. "Excuse me, sir. Are you Liam?" Liam blinked, surprised. "Yes." The guard handed him an envelope. "A woman asked me to give this to you if you ever came." His hand shook as he opened it. The note inside was simple. "I knew you'd find me here. I'm not giving up on us, Liam. Not now. Not ever. Meet me where it all began." Liam looked at Maya, who was staring up at the painting with wide, reverent eyes. "It looks like a happy feeling, Daddy." He knelt down and hugged her tight, the scent of her hair and the warmth of her small body grounding him. "It is, sweetie," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "It is." He took her hand, and together they left the museum, not with the quiet desperation of a man chasing a lost love, but with the steady, certain purpose of a man going home. They went back to the library. The afternoon sun streamed through the large windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The room was quiet, peaceful, a world away from the chaos of the city outside. And there she was at their table, a book open in front of her, a cup of tea by her side. She looked up as they approached, a slow, beautiful smile spreading across her face. It was the same smile he had seen that first day, but this time it wasn't hesitant. It was certain. He walked to the table and sat down, placing the yellow crayon between them. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice raw with emotion. "I was a coward. I let the storm scare me away." "We were both scared," she said softly, her hand covering his on the table. "But the sun is stronger." Maya climbed into the empty chair, pulling out her coloring book as if no time had passed at all. The three of them sat there, a quiet, unlikely constellation in the hushed sanctuary of the library. There were still 1,000 obstacles between them, 1,000 differences that wouldn't magically disappear. Her life was still one of boardrooms and headlines, and his was still one of careful budgets and freelance dreams. But as he looked at Catherine, at the love and strength shining in her eyes, he knew that they would face it together. The bridge between their worlds wasn't made of steel or money. It was made of simpler, stronger things: a shared glance, a child's drawing, a moment of kindness, a yellow crayon. It was real, and this time they wouldn't let it break. The reconciliation wasn't a magic wand. Life didn't suddenly become easy. The paparazzi didn't vanish overnight, and the chasm between their financial realities was still there. But what had changed was their approach. They stopped hiding. They decided to face the storm together, on their own terms. Catherine made the first move. She called a press conference, but not the kind her board expected. She didn't discuss quarterly earnings or new projects. She stood at the podium, looking poised and confident, and she told her story. She spoke of the pressures of her position, of her struggle with loneliness and burnout, and of her desire to lead a more authentic life. Then she spoke about Liam. "For the past few weeks," she said, her voice clear and steady, "the media has been speculating about my relationship with a man named Liam. They have called him a mystery, a distraction. They have tried to paint him as someone who doesn't belong in my world. They are wrong." She looked directly into the cameras. "Liam is a brilliant architectural designer and the kindest, most principled man I have ever met. He and his daughter reminded me of what is truly valuable in this world. He doesn't belong in my world. He is helping me build a new one, a better one." She then announced the launch of the Sterling Foundation for Community Arts, its first project being the funding and construction of a new, state-of-the-art public library to be designed by Liam. The room erupted in a flurry of questions and flashing cameras. But Catherine didn't stay to answer them. She had said what needed to be said. Her statement changed the narrative. It wasn't a story about a billionaire and her blue-collar boyfriend anymore. It was a story about partnership, respect, and two people trying to make a positive impact on the world. The scrutiny lessened, replaced by a grudging and then genuine respect. Liam, for his part, threw himself into the library project. It was the dream he had sketched on a napkin, now given life and resources. He and Catherine worked side by side, their different skills complementing each other perfectly. He would design, and she would navigate the complex logistics of permits and construction. Their meetings weren't in sterile boardrooms, but over his cluttered drafting table, with Maya often providing her own colorful additions to the blueprints. They were building something tangible, something that would stand as a testament to their partnership. They were integrating their lives, not by erasing the differences, but by embracing them. He would attend her formal charity dinners, feeling not out of place, but proud to stand by her side. She would spend her weekends at his small apartment, helping Maya with her homework and laughing as Liam tried, and failed, to cook something that wasn't slightly burnt. One evening, months later, they stood on the construction site of the new library. The frame was up, a skeleton of steel reaching for the sky. The sun was setting, painting the clouds in hues of orange and pink. Maya ran ahead, her laughter echoing in the vast open space. Liam slipped his arm around Catherine's waist, pulling her close. "You know," he said, his voice full of a quiet, happy confidence he hadn't felt in years, "I think this is going to be a beautiful building." Catherine leaned her head on his shoulder, watching their daughter dance in the twilight. "I know it will be," she said softly. "Look at the architects." He smiled, kissing the top of her head. The sad queen had finally found her kingdom, and the struggling artist had discovered that the greatest thing he would ever build wasn't a structure of steel and glass, but a family built on a foundation of love, respect, and a single yellow crayon.